Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And last week we saw the start of the Winter Nexus event. I personally do like the Winter Nexus event. It lasts long enough that you can really go after everything. It's got filaments, so you can always find the content, and because everything is grouped up in the ice storms, it tends to be a little bit busy there. So you do have to either be pretty efficient in how you try to run things, or you have to, like me, you'll want to wait a little bit for the initial rush to be over before you jump in yourself. But you can sometimes also throw snowballs at stuff and then get some extra points that way. So overall, I do personally enjoy the Winter Nexus. I think it's well put together. It has plenty of options: combat sites, data sites, mining sites. So there's a little bit for everyone there. I do like it. I hope you're enjoying that one as well. And of course, we're getting closer and closer to Christmas and the holiday season. So I hope everyone can get in the mood despite potentially the difficult situation all over the world still with the bug. So let's take a quick look at the New Eden store then. I am also curious as to what CCP is planning to do coming up, of course, for EVE Online, but let's be honest, they're hoping to do a FanFest next year, so I personally don't expect too much when it comes to earth-shattering changes, and I do think that they'll hold off a little bit, unfortunately, again, until FanFest, so that they can really come out there with cool talks, plans, trailers, and some really nice announcements. But alright, in the New Eden store we get some new goggles if you want them. The Yule Star skin, animated skin, that's pretty cool, is there as well. I'm not sure how it's gonna work, but last year you basically got a countdown towards Christmas as part of that green bar that would fill up, and then you'd get that star. So that's pretty cool as well. Is it Christmas or the New Year? I'm not exactly sure on that one actually. A couple of new skins as well for the mining ships. That's of course, with the patch that does make sense. Especially some of the mining barges have become way more important than the Orca and the Rorqual. Some new apparel here as well. Okay, alright, the Varger gets a Yule Star skin. That's pretty cool. Orca radioactive reclamation skin. There's a lot to discover here if you are one of the big fans of skins. And then we want to take a quick look at the services. Nothing special to report here at the moment. Alright, moving on to the market. Then, as always, we start with some plex and stuff, and that will be at 3 minutes. There we go. So let's start with plex, and you may already have seen it on the ticker, but here in Jita we are down slightly in prices. Let's take a look at the charts here. Definitely seeing some hesitation, and basically after the sale that happened late November, we have started to move sideways, well above, just below the 2.8 million mark, at the 2.7 million mark for the average price. We're at 2.9 million for the sellers in Jita and 2.75 million for the buyers. That's interesting. Buyers to me seem to be closer to that average price than the sellers. They go up slightly in the player-owned trade hubs, and then the sellers still at 2.9 in the trade hubs as well. So overall, pretty narrow margin at only around 200,000 disc, or a little bit less than that, but the average price at the moment seems to be dominated by the buyers. So people are dumping their plex at these prices, which is interesting. It does, in my opinion, indicate that the market is really hesitant to decide on structural inflation and on bringing the price of plex up above 3 million disc. If that were to ever happen, I do think we're gonna be in a completely different market, but for now clearly the market is holding off on that. I guess that, just like me, so far the new Dawn patch really hasn't brought that much in the term of like long-term goals or anything like that to do. Sure, I got a couple of mining ships to build. In fact, one of you guys already sent me a nice Mackinac fit I'll probably try to use at this point, but when it comes to really new stuff, we're still not seeing any of that. The multiple pilot train certificate basically recovered from the sale, so here we had a pretty sharp drop from around 1.5 billion down to well below 1.4 billion. This is like the wave of the plex sale, this one here that rolls through this segment of the market. We get a little bit more of a recovery on this one before we start to move to hesitate. 1.45 billion for the sellers, 1.35 billion for the buyers. Definitely again not the top and not willing to just jump right back on that upward trend. For the skill extractors, we get very same pattern as plex, of course, although we don't see the volume as pronounced here when it comes to the plex sale that happened late November. The price impact was definitely there, and now we can clearly see in December we start to move sideways. 330 million for the sellers, 315 for the buyers. That's a really narrow margin there between sellers and buyers. Curious to see how that's going to evolve. And then the impact on the injectors, here are the large scale injectors remaining decently high, 680 for the 5-day moving average, a little bit of pressure at the tail end of that one, but we're still talking 670 million going up to 680 on the front page for the sellers and 635 million for the buyers. I do think that the theory will hold up here, that if there's one thing that is keeping the injector market up at the moment, it is the Duracell nerfs that probably indicate quite a few players. Well, let's decide what we want to do with those characters, and maybe extracting. Hello, Shelia Ripper on Eve Radio. Yep, that's what I'm doing. So say hi to YouTube here. But all right, 680 million right here for the large skill injectors, and I would say price is probably pretty high because there might just be a little bit of skill point movement happening, especially in the nullsec player groups. And alt pool. Then we get the small scale injectors doing pretty much the same thing, still also 5-day moving average close to that 140 million high point, a little bit of pressure on that one as well at the tail end, 136 million to 126 million ISK, but definitely very expensive at the moment. For the daily alpha injectors, I'm kind of curious on that one. Alright, slight step up, but still pretty stable. I guess that you can also see that the sale itself will have been quite large, not just in volumes, but in availability. And as a result, we have a really tough time to break back out towards that 45 million. On top of that, right, Plex is hesitating here as well, which I would say is very good news for those alpha players as we dove down below 40 million. But we're not just going straight back to 45 and up. We are selling these for almost 42 million. Buyers coming in at just below 39 million. Definitely still a very nice daily goal to reach. And considering this chart just below average, should give them quite a bit of room. I keep looking back at that comment. I should really focus on the task at hand here. Next up, we've got the hypercores that are showing that same hesitation here from September on. We had that nice upward swing to 330,000 ISK, showing players expecting ISK to become quite plentiful, prices to potentially go up, but now here after the Plex sale and everything, we have more hesitation. 5-day moving average slightly down, everything is coming together at the current price point, a little bit above 305,000 for the sellers, 288 for the buyers. A big difference here is that the sellers are still dominating the price for hypercores. Next up, we are moving on to the mineral market, coming in at 9 minutes. That's a little bit sooner than normal. Did I miss any of them? Small injectors? No, we got everything. All right, let's start here with titanium. And this is very interesting. Just a day after the patch, we spotted a slight upswing for titanium, but I did not expect things to basically start to show a real trend here. Definitely an upward swing and getting back to the June numbers. So that's been quite a while since we've seen titanium be substantially between that 4.5 to 5 ISK range. And at the moment, is it still the same in JITA itself? We were selling 494, very close to 5 ISK, so a little bit of upward pressure here, and buyers at 440. So it's not like it's really demand that's pushing things up too much here. I don't think we've got a healthy margin of around 10%. at 440 for these buyers. That's opened up a little bit, and so we're actually giving titanium a little bit of breathing room on the upside, meaning slightly better for HiSec miners. I still have to to check it out, but from what I've heard, there's quite a few belts, or all HiSec belts, that have changed substantially in shape, that would actually decrease your effectiveness in there, as everything is more spread out and in a less predictable pattern. That could, of course, be, I don't know how to put this, but could again go back to my thesis that sure, while the mining potential is up quite substantially by doubling the resources, the amount of time needed to bring everything to market is actually going to go up as well, especially if they're making it harder to grab all of those resources by changing the belts. And so the net result could be next to nothing, and in fact here titanium is saying we might actually become a little bit more expensive. Not what I expected. And then there is a counter force that I should mention here, is that it's taking a little bit of time for Tech 2 crystals and things like that to be created for the variant that increases your yield, but someone mentioned that their corporation is like fully engaged into that, and that they are expecting their mining ups to increase in potential. Then we've got a pyrite that does the exact opposite. Kind of interesting here as well, and someone mentioned this, by the way, in the video when I took a look at the market right after the New Dawn patch, that pyrite and Mexalon are still decoupled from titanium because they are available in moon mining sites at the moment, and that could explain the reason why these are, or at least pyrite is going down in price. Clear trend break right here as we reach 17.5. New Dawn hits and the market says no, we are actually going down in price on this one. 17.16 for the sellers and 15.12 for the buyers. That's over 10% in margin, so that's definitely, you know, a little bit of buyer pressure that's going down in price by opening up that margin. Then we got the Mexalon price. Interesting, increased volume but also increased price. We're again starting to play with those June numbers when it comes to Mexalon. 68 for the sellers and 64 for the buyers. That's a big difference, way less than 10% here in margin, so clearly a little bit more buy pressure coming in here. Volume wise, 10 to 15 million are the largest Mexalon orders. Again, a little bit different here, available in HiSec but also in moon mining. So to see this kind of performance is actually pretty impressive. Then we've got my favorite here is Isogen. Although we have to give back quite a little bit of ground, we're making our way back down to 100 ISK. Volumes are up, I find that to be pretty interesting. And we're at 108, 107 for the sellers and 93 ISK for the buyers. But what I am noticing here again is that we are managing to do 20, 20 and an 80 million units, but then we're 30, 50-ish. So overall, this is still not in line with what you would expect when you look at, for instance, the Mexalon volumes that are available. So this to me is still old reserves that are coming in, and perhaps the New Dawn patch has been a trigger for more people to bring out their reserves. They're seeing one-year high points at 125, and so they have been flooding the market with their Isogen that has probably been staying in their holes for a very long time before it gets bad, is perhaps what they're thinking. But yeah, they're not really willing to go below 100 ISK at this point for the sellers. Buyers are trying to make that happen, but I personally again am of the opinion that eventually we're gonna run out of these 20, 80, 50 million unit sell orders, that they're gonna start to be a little bit more careful there again, and then we're gonna hit the 10s and things like that, gonna start to match Mexalon, and that should again be at a higher consensus price for Isogen, as we should slowly be chewing through those reserves as well. Then we've got the Noxium price, which is confirming the trend. That's interesting. In fact, going towards again high points for both June, early August, things like that. But an upward trend that has started with the New Dawn patch does seem to be confirmed here as well, for, in my opinion, another mineral that is in an active supply demand situation. And so this could to me indicate that the impact on low sec could actually be a little bit larger than what was previously expected by myself and by the market. Before New Dawn, right, we were still stuck at the 1000 ISK range, and my theory was that we saw a big move in Zydrine because Nelsik said we're seeing a big nerf coming. It's going to impact our potential, so that's going to be a problem. Let's increase the price. But for low-sec, I guess people were still thinking there's enough ninja mining out there in even smaller ships in order to try and stay under the radar, that it won't affect us that badly. But now the market is saying something completely different. 1300 ISK all of a sudden for the sellers of Noxium, except for one small exception here, and 1130 for the buyers. That's clearly a sizable upward trend. And then looking at these volumes, 2.6 million, 1.5, 2.5 million, these are the active volumes that can be produced at the moment potentially. And if you then lose the rorquals, it could mean that the high end or the largest quantities will also take a little bit of a hit on that. And thus we see all of a sudden an upward spike in Noxium, which at the moment though is still in line with what we've seen in the last couple of months. So this is not like we've completely changed the game just yet, but definitely we're trending at the high point for the Noxium prices. So for me, this is also an indication if this has any structure to it. So if this lasts a little bit, then that would be very good news in my opinion for people that want higher isogen prices, because the same impact should potentially be seen here as well. The mining potential for low-sec mining, since Noxium is indicating it getting lower, should translate in even less isogen availability eventually. Then we've got Zydrine. This is exactly what I was talking about here. Early November we move up all of a sudden from, is that like an 800-ish, 850 to 1000 ISK, and now we are basically flat with a slight upward pressure on Zydrine. 1160 for the sellers, yeah, that's definitely up a little bit, and almost 1000 ISK now for the buyers. And so to me, this is that predictability, that organizational power that Nelsik has, does mean that stuff that comes from there market-wise moves completely differently from everything else, as they do have basically economists in all the large groups and alliances that do the calculations and try to make predictions beforehand. And that is why we have this basically late reaction from Noxium that's kind of getting confirmed here. Same thing with Tritanium. And then we have that Zydrine that basically anticipated on that and went up about a month ago. Finally, we've got Megasite for our Tech 1 minerals. We still have to check Morphite, of course, must not forget that. Still stuck, I would say, 550 to 600 ISK, pretty flat over the last couple of months. And here we are talking 590 for the sellers, 555 for the buyers. Really stable volume-wise. You get a couple of 10 millions in here, but you can see that mostly sellers struggle to get above 1 million units on a single sell order. And I think what's keeping things in check is the fact that you get Megasite from Trickle Avian space as well. And so here that's actually what's keeping Megasite in check, I think, compared to Zydrine. And as a result, that's also what should mitigate a little bit of the rorqual nerf when it comes to the availability as well. And so we get this nice, stable, relatively cheap price for Megasite. And finally, we do have Morphite that is continuing to go down in price here, breaking to a price below 60,000 ISK now, 57.4 for the sellers, 52.6 for the buyers. Should be good news for Tech 2 industry because they have been struggling with that extremely expensive Morphite for a pretty long time. We're slowly edging back to that 50k we started the year at, which is still very, very, very expensive. I mean, historically speaking, Morphite at 10,000 ISK was normal. I mentioned it practically every week here, but what we are noticing, of course, is that the pressure is building, and I think this again is quite logical. Availability has doubled yet again. Yield wise, right, I think effort is still quite high, but what are you going to focus on if resources become available all of a sudden? It is, of course, Morphite. And so this downtrend here for the Morphite is actually quite normal, even if you don't see a massive net impact from New Dawn in how much is going to come to the market in minerals within a given period. But what would you rush for? Obviously 60,000 ISK Morphite, that's what you would rush for. Next up, the PI market. That's coming in at 1950, let's say. There we go. As always, we start here with the broadcast. Notice that, well, it's trying to stop the bleeding, but it's only slowly slowing down its descent in price at the moment. I'm a little bit of surprise by that. I thought perhaps with New Dawn, a little bit more minerals becoming available potentially, that there would be a little bit more demand for broadcast nodes. But on the other hand, right, CCP sort of showing their hand here and saying, well, if we're going to tweak the production cost of larger ships, we're gonna do it in PI first and foremost, and so that of course is not good news or does not portend to a lot of good news longer term. Broadcast nodes thus staying above 1 million, but only by a little bit, 1.2 for the sellers and just above 1 million for the buyers. That's a very, very big trend break, of course, over the last 2 months or so. Construction blocks, I'm just expecting to not see a lot, honestly. We're reaching 7,000 disc, which is, I mean, on this chart it's practically the average. We're still below average on the 5-day moving average here, but let's not forget that historical perspective. 1 million disc for 10,000 disc for construction blocks. 1 million would be the dream, but yeah, it's 10k is actually pretty normal historically speaking, I think, and so this is still quite depressed. 7,000 for the sellers, 6.5 for the buyers. Way larger margin here all of a sudden, showing that we're clearly struggling with overproduction. Consumer electronics back below 6k, 6.3 for the sellers, 5.7 for the buyers. Average price below 6,000 disc shows you that even with these fewer buyers on the market, players are so desperate to get rid of their consumer electronics that they're still dumping to these buy orders as well. Then we've got coolants doing a little bit better despite the fact that fuels took a big hit this week. Coolants are running out, 12,000 disc for the sellers, 9,000 disc for the buyers. I've never been happier that I've chosen the easy route in PI, where I basically have a couple of planets that focus on fuel related PI materials. Completely different dynamic. This is, even historically speaking, a very high price for coolants. So definitely more that I'm going to bring to the market and sell at this point. Cryoprotectant solutions still slightly trending up away from the 100,000 discs. So I think historically speaking, this is a normal price. 107 for the sellers, 94,000 for the buyers. It is tied to implants. I again am going to quickly share my theory here. I think that because of the compression changes that are coming later next year, that eventually we'll also get an implant set tied to compression on ships. But I could be wrong on that. It could be a very long time, but eventually I do think CCP will come out with more implants, and then the more you manage to buy well below 100,000 disc, the more you're basically ready for such an announcement. Enriched uranium very flat at 9k. 9.3 for the sellers, 8.8 for the buyers. Tied to fuels, a little bit better, but still not great. Integrity response drones, alright, the first one, advanced PI materials that actually saw some more volumes and pushed the price back above 1.5 million. 1.7 for the sellers, just below 1.5 for the buyers. Big difference compared to, let's say, the high point here for the broadcast nodes. Here for these integrity response drones, in my opinion, is still a decently good sized margin, right? 200,000 disc, that's way more than 10% on the sell price. That is quite sizable, so that potentially we can reverse this pretty quickly. Mechanical parts tied to fuels doing way better, going back above 8,000 disc in the last couple of days. 8.3 for the sellers, 7.8 for the buyers, and with those average prices, it's actually sellers that are winning out, and thus they're saying, yeah, there's no need to rush that mechanical parts dump, which is kind of weird, right? How people are just still dumping all of these construction blocks at the low price points, and then the mechanical parts are seeing high points, and then they're, all right, we'll be patient, I'll put up a sell order. Well, it will of course eventually sell at these prices then, considering the current markets. Nanites trying to get back above 5,000 ISK on average, 5.1 for the sellers, 4.8 for the buyers, but that's still very, very, very low historically speaking. Nano factories also doing the reverse, actually on some volumes, right, dipping below 700,000 ISK. I guess some people are saying, well, if there's more industry coming, that should actually still mean more demand for these types of advanced PI materials, and so they've been buying at 775, buyers at above 700,000 disk again. A little bit of a recovery, so maybe broadcast nodes needs a little bit more time, and we'll see that reversal as well. Let's see how the others are doing. Organic mortar applicators, yeah, definitely it's broke that trend as well here. Getting back towards 750, 752 for the sellers, going to 800,000 disk on the front page, and then 660 for the buyers. That's still a decently good sized margin though. Recursive computing modules, at the tail end you can see we're also starting to get back above a million. Above a million for the sellers and touching a million for the buyers. So we're trying to form a bottom here though. And then robotics did well for a little bit, or try to do well. It's still relative. This stuff used to cost 100,000 disk a piece, but now is going back down a little bit. 65 for the sellers, 63,000 for the buyers. Then we get the self-harmonizing power cores that are again going back down on the announcement from CCP that, hey, we're gonna cut DPI needs for the large ships in order to help industrialists a little bit, but we're stalling now on that decreased price. 1.5 million in fact all of a sudden for the sellers, and almost 1.2 for the buyers. Sterile conduits showing the exact same thing, reached the bottom at 900,000 disk and is working its way back up a little bit. Sellers are working their way back to a million. Buyers still at 830, so that margin has opened up because of all of that. Yukomi superconductors seeing more pressure, 75,000 now for first seller, 65 for the buyers, clearly under pressure here. And then we get the wetware mainframe that, just like the broadcast nodes, is not able to stem the bleeding just yet, heading to a price at around 1.4 million on the chart, and it's 1.4 for the sellers and almost 1.4 for the buyers as well. So here that bottom I think is still forming. By next week we should have that in on the broadcast nodes and the wetware mainframes as well. Advanced moon mats next, 2650. There we go. As always, we start with the carbides, and for some reason the music has stopped, but alright, let's try to keep going. 179 for the sellers, 168 for the buyers, and price wise, well, we are basically still at around that 175 on the chart, meaning the premium is still in, and this is now where we are hovering around. Quite normal, I would say. We clearly stabilized as well after the April patch, the industry patch. So overall, a little bit more expensive, but not crazy. Then we've got the titanium carbide for Caldari. That's seeing still a little bit of pressure, but again landing on that 175, starts the year around the 150. So this is again same story, 186 to 165. We are on that premium 25 ISK added, 25 ISK added over the last year or so. That's kind of alright, and then completely recovering from all the volatility we saw in April. For the Fernite carbide, it's again, yeah, definitely the same, right? The 125 to 150 range at the start of the year, April, May, June. Here is all of the volatility, and then now we have stabilized and we're paying the premium. We're just below 175, 164 for the sellers, 157 for the buyers. And then finally, tungsten carbide for Amar, and this one is finally confirming the trend yet again. Late last month it did go back down to a price below 150, meaning that it matched the 1 year ago price range, but the market came in here, we're back well above 150, so the premium is back, and this was actually an indication that, yeah, maybe we overshot a little bit. All the others still held on to the pattern. Tungsten carbide broke back down to the price from a year ago, so that was a slight buy opportunity. We're back at 160 for the sellers and 140 for the buyers. Next up, for the metamaterials, those have been the most stable part of resources despite the April dome that we will see there, and a little bit of more volatility. Here are the photonic metamaterials, start at 12,000 disk, 12.5 probably average for that first couple of months before April, and now you can see here we're right back on that very same range. 12,400 and a little bit for the sellers, 12.3 for the buyers, basically right on that average. For the nonlinear Caldari metamaterials, yeah, 20k and above here, March on the announcement, a little bit of volatility, and then at the tail end here, a little bit of a downwards pressure, but nothing that's indicating we're going down the toilet or anything like that. 19,000 for the sellers, 16,000 for the buyers. Perhaps a slight buy opportunity if you're feeling like perhaps volatility is potentially coming back here, but honestly, I would not expect it. I do expect this to be a little bit low so that the price will make its way back to 20,000, but I don't see any reason why we would expect like a complete breakout that's very tradable. Then we've got our Minmetar plasmonic metamaterials. Same story right here in April. You can see those peaks keep going down. Those bottoms, well, they touch 15k on some occasions, but then we're nicely landing on 17.5, slightly more expensive than a year ago. But overall, 17.9 for the sellers, 17.4 for the buyers. This is very, very reasonable yet again on a 1-year chart, I think, for the range. And then terahertz metamaterials for Amar, 15k. Then here again the April volatility fully absorbed, and we're right back around that 15k below, above, a little bit above at the moment. We're talking 15.6, that's not a lot, above 15,000, and 15.3 for the buyers, showing some demand, of course, that is keeping this price slightly above average, you could say. But again, range-wise, this is very, very reasonable and very stable. That's actually been quite a surprise overall. Most other materials have had way more of a reaction and at least some difference between the start of the year and the end of the year. Or a lot of minerals took a little bit of a drop, but for these metamaterials, we're actually doing quite okay. Or no, I should actually say titanium took a little bit of a drop because that was changed substantially here in the April patch. But then, yeah, and Mexlon took a drop as well. Some of the others actually year over year are up. So you got these differences, whereas, yeah, for metamaterials, you're basically right where we started. Then for the fermionic condensate, so the other advanced moon materials, nice little comeback here from a 1-year low point of 50k, trying to get back to 70, never reaching that, and we're cresting at this point, so expect pressure to be back on the menu, 64,000 to 62,000. It's reasonable, it's on the average for the chart, which historically speaking actually is not great. Then we've got ferrogel. This was to be expected, a nice breakout, 45,000, definitely above 40k was sellable, but it doesn't last very long here. Massive drop back towards the 1-year low point below 30,000 disc. 29 for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. Yeah, that's definitely at the low end of the range. Fullerenes still stuck at 700. I don't know if you guys remember, but a couple years ago, 1,000, 1,100 disc. Pretty much a dual price for fullerite, so this is not that great either. Hypersynaptic fibers, new bit of a breakout to 11,000 disc, which I think is historically speaking not even that great. It of course looks nice on the chart here, but it's not that great. And again, the market plugs that gap. We're back at 9,000 disc pretty much. 9,350 for the sellers, 9,200 for the buyers, a bit above that, but it's definitely still quite low. Nano transistors stuck at 4k, which again is not that great. Phenolic composites completely lost all the gains that it had made here in April. Looked really nice here up to 2000 disc, but we're basically again back where we started. Which was not a great jumping point actually. 1400 to 1423, so super narrow margin. We are finding a bottom here, but the range is right back where it was a year ago. Pressurized oxidizers, bit of pressure here, 5-day moving average below 20-day moving average. This is of course a new material, and apparently availability is going up on this one, selling for 9.6, buyers at 8.7. Reinforced carbon fibers, we're finally starting to see a little bit of movement here on this chart. As it becomes larger, you do get more information, of course. Here 12.5, and actually yeah, basically stabilizing on that range. 13 for the sellers, 12,640 for the buyers, so a little bit above that. Ceramic fibers then is also basically right back to a price just above 300 disc where it was a year ago. That's a nice big dome, which starts off at a pretty low range historically speaking. So yeah, it's quite okay. I would say advanced materials are actually pretty stable, and are basically mostly back where they were a year ago, except for the carbides that kind of confirmed that we are paying a bit of a margin on that one. So let's see what's happening in the Tech 2 ships then. I think a year ago we at least had potentially some volatility. Is it coming back? That's really what I'm hunting for myself. 34.50. When dumping your ISK, remember every ISK counts. All right, let's get started. Tech 2 ships here is the Basilisk, and that unfortunately is not volatile. You can actually get a little bit of a sense of that, although the April announcement and patch, of course, didn't help if you were looking for stable prices. But yeah, bottom at 180, then you could sell at 230. Right, there's trades that were possible around a year ago, and now we are super stable at that 200 million range. 198 to 185. Wouldn't want to sell, wouldn't want to buy. This is just an okay price if you want to fly a Basilisk. Then we've got the Cerberus, kind of the same story, just below 230 million. The volumes are just not budging the price, but here, right, we touched 200 million. You could have definitely bought below that, but then we jump up to 280. Yeah, that's a trade to be made, and then we go back down, and then on April we jumped up to 300 million. So here, first part of the year and before this, at least we had some volatility. Now we have basically found the middle ground, and we are not moving too much. So far, for me, it's still, we're hunting for bargains, which some of the what are the logistics cruisers had shown that. And here we go, Guardian. All right, the bad news is it's not jumping enough, but at least it's jumping. So we went below 180, and I told you guys I would definitely try to buy a Guardian here. It's a bottom potentially, and it does feel like if you then have the patience for a buy order, you're probably buying a very cheap Guardian. And so we're jumping back up, but the bad news is we're still not even reaching that previous spike, which was still below 200 million ISK. So if you're looking for the tradable volatility, this is unfortunately not it. You can see in the last couple of days we started to move sideways on the daily averages. So we just had a little bit of a jump on some buying, and that is it. We're still at 188 million for the sellers, 167, 168 pretty much for the buyers. You're basically still buying very cheap Guardians at the moment, and this is just a little bit of opportunistic buying. Yeah, those bottom feeders like myself at the moment in the Tech 2 market are clearly keeping an eye on that. But a breakout above any previous spikes is not in the books at the moment, so the volatility will have to wait for that. Probably will need some null-sig action, in my opinion. Hound making its way back above 25 million, which again is right where you don't want to be if you're looking for trades. 26 to 23 million, very, very low margin for a stealth bomber. So yeah, at the moment I would say right here, 1 year low point. Try to buy a couple of cheap Hounds and then hold them for better times. Ikitursa actually making its way up in price, 650 for the sellers, 621 for the buyers. Potentially the Nexus event has something to do with that, perhaps. And Sheila is still going here, but all right. Potentially the price here is going up, and because of the event. I think a well-fit Ikitursa, I think the targets are in the right ranges, can run these, and then you're running them in a cruiser, which does mean a little bit more speed to go from side to side. It does make some sense to go for the smallest possible ship. I think Ikitursa is an option, so that could be an explanation here. We shouldn't see too much of a move on the Ishtar now. It's just slowly edging to 210 million, so it's definitely not in buy territory. 203 to 198 million, that's just a 5 million ISK margin here, super narrow, so I don't think you want to be buying here as an investment or as a gamble, I should say. Actually, yeah, buying on the markets is more like gambling. A Manticore, look at that range, 25 to 30 million, and we're just, you know, stuck in between that very hard. And then again, go to the chart a year ago, you could have easily bought below 20 million and sold at 35 million a year later. That's a trade. Here we're just not seeing it. 30 million for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. Super narrow margin here again, not where we want to be as traders, or active traders I should say. Then the Munin, same story, it's below 200 million, so we'll probably see a nice buy price, 195 to 183. but other than, yeah, you're buying a relatively cheap Munin, it's really not more than that. The Nemesis is seeing some pressure yet again, third time in the last couple of months. So if we are below 21 million for the buyers, that starts to be interesting. We're at 21 million for the buyers. Look at that, 22 to 21 million. That's as narrow as it gets. But it is definitely at the low end of the chart. So if you don't have Tech 2 investments for the longer term, I would say here the Nemesis is one of those opportunities. I would definitely not put all my eggs in this basket. I would slowly buy, because potentially you will see lower prices later down the line depending on what CCP announces. But I do think here the Nemesis, buying one or two does make sense. The Oneros is stuck at 180, shouldn't see a lot of demand. Yeah, 162 for the buyers. Same story here as well, although I would not want to hold much more than one Oneros, to be honest. You're buying at 160, which is pretty low on the chart. So some of these logistics cruisers again have these opportunities, and that does make sense to me, because on big NOSIC engagements, a couple of logistics fleets might just become the ticket for good sales. The Panther stuck at its price range for the whole week pretty much. 1.2 billion for the sellers, 1.1 for the buyers. Slightly expensive, I would say, but nothing too special. The Purifier didn't even go very low. I mean, a couple of months ago touched 21 million here on the average prices. We're just not even able, even now in the last couple of months, we're seeing even less volatility. That's kind of crazy. 25 million to 22 million pretty much for these buyers. These are such low margins. That's not what you want to see for active trading. Scimitar. All right, how much below 180 are the buyers? 174. Again, same story. You can definitely try to buy a Scimitar very cheaply at the moment, but again, daily volumes are not great, so don't buy too many. And then the Widow is still well above 1.1 billion, so we're not seeing too much of a change. 1.2 to 1.1 billion for the Widow. So cost-wise, we're actually still pretty expensive. Well, Morphite is going down, but is 50,000 disc Morphite really that cheap? I don't think so. And then we get the Zealot, the first one, which is in some Amar ship markets. That seemed to be the case. We do have a little bit of volatility. So over this entire segment, this is the first one where we have a tradable chart that's reminiscent of about a year ago right here. So you buy below 180 million, and at the moment you're selling for 243, buyers coming in at 214. So a single trade to me is not an indication that, hey, we gotta start to really pay attention to these low prices. No, we're still trying to find the best bargains, buy the lowest prices. If you happen to, have made your move on the Zealot here, which made sense, it was a 1-year low point, of course, then you have made your first trade here. But I'm not seeing that as a trend just yet. We need to see it happen in way more ships than that. But it is good news, of course. A Tech 2 trade on the chart. That's pretty nice. Let's move on to the Tech 3 ship market, coming in at 42.50. You may have seen that on the ticker as well here. Tengu moved up quite a little bit, so I do expect a little bit of a movement in the Tech 3 cruiser market. But let's first take a look at the destroyers. Here are the Confessors landing on 45 million, 47 for the sellers, 44.5 for the buyers. Availability is still quite nice with 100 of them right here. Still 30 plus coming in the last 24 hours. That is of course what's putting the pressure on the price, and this comes in line with the average price for the year. So I would say Confessor has normalized and still has that buffer to keep things in check. Where are the others? Well, Hecate jumping up to almost 55 million. Could that be? Well, it's not even on buying. Look at that. Just going down in volume, so availability should be terrible. Yeah, 55 million for the sellers, 50 million for the buyers. Very, very expensive, and in my book, again, kind of unexpected. I don't see how we keep drying up in the same ship again and again. Look here, look here, look here. But Hecate, 50 45 million. Very, very expensive. If you're producing tactical destroyers, I think you'd love to produce some Hecates right now. Then we've got the Jackdaw that's staying at 50 million. Obviously, Confessor should have absorbed quite a little bit, making that availability. Hecate again, we're running dry. 50 million for the sellers, 46 for the buyers, and here half a page. But this is still just only 30 ships or so, so it's not completely crazy. I think the Jackdaw can maintain this price range pretty easily, which should mean that the Svepel is probably plateauing. Yeah, it is plateauing at this point, so your sell opportunity, if you bought the dip right here, is still on. Almost 49 million for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours, just 6 ships, showing that the Svepel is still not very popular, but at least you're getting a better price than the Confessor. This should dry up and should mean a move towards more Hecates at these prices. So hopefully this will be absorbed pretty quickly. This will mean that the Hecate can, the Confessor can move up a little bit, as at the moment it's actually the cheapest of all of the destroyers. And then we are taking a look at these cruisers. Here is the Legion. We are running out of them. Price wise, we're also up substantially, of course, on this. 230 million for the only Legion in Jita 182. I think this is due to the event. In fact, I also made a quick poll on the channel there to ask what you guys are using, and well, Tech 3 cruisers are there, and then of course we got the classics, Rattlesnake, Praxis. You know, it's quite normal. These are very capable platforms who now also don't lose SP anymore. So when something comes in that's like, you know, they're actually pretty good because they've got enough tank, they got enough DPS, but they also have the speed. When everyone else is using battleships and you're zooming around in a strategic cruiser, you actually probably have a little bit of an edge on them. And so here we go, Legion up in price, I would say, on the Winter Nexus event. Loki, not so much. That's interesting. It's actually, I think, a decently good one. 200 million for the sellers, 177 for the buyers, 230. Yeah, if you're looking for something that's still available for you, a Tech 3 cruiser wise, it's the Loki. I myself am still training for that one. And then we get the Proteus. That one is down in price, 165 to 160. Which is interesting. From what I gather, the drones are close enough, and some of you guys are actually using the Proteus for the event to great effect. With a couple of whips, I think you're actually doing pretty good DPS, but it's clearly still the least popular one. And then finally we've got the Tengu that's actually moving up in price, not super violently on the chart, but if we go from 190 to 200 million here, excuse me, I do have to drink here for a second. There we go, 200 million for the sellers, 183 for the buyers. I think again, slight upwards pressure because of the event. Tengu, shields, passive, lots of new thing in those sites, makes a lot of sense to me yet again. But the Legion is actually the one that broke out the most. I did not expect that. Is it on volumes? It is on volumes. So it looks like the Legion is actually very popular for the Nexus event. Does it have like a resistance type advantage or something like that, that it's so popular? That is a possibility, but not my expected winner. I thought Loki, Tengu tend to be the PvE favorites, but yeah, looks like Winter Nexus and the Legion are doing quite well. And then for the extra product of the week, gas, of course, also potentially impacted by New Dawn, and I didn't check that one in the market video, so gas at 48 minutes. Still a pretty big segment, so let's try and find it. I think it's materials and then gas cloud materials. There we go. We'll start with the full range, I think, first. And that's interesting, definitely down in price quite substantially at the moment. 7,800 for the seller, 7,300 for the buyers. So we had a very nice last couple of months going above 10,000 ISK, but now we're back on the more normal average price. For C32, also seeing downwards pressure here. Let's see if we're reaching 15k at 10,000 for the buyers. Ooh, that demand seems to be drying up here. 17k for the sellers. C32 still able to stay on an average price above 40,000 ISK here, 48 to 44. Then the C50 is still also right on the average since the April, but not expensive or anything like that in my book. Here is C540, also not too expensive. Not noticing too much here when it comes to New Dawn, except mostly pressure towards average prices. Here's 2000 ISK. C70 is 4K, nothing too special. C72, more pressure. And again, above 10,000 ISK last couple of months, in fact, in the entire summer. Great prices for C72, and now drop off 98 to 7100 for the buyers. And then C84 I was actually already at a 1-year low point, recovers a little bit from that, but of course not as good as October, July or April, where it was double the current price. But I think where we could see a little bit more information would be here, Cito and the Miko, which of course is needed in the new industry changes. And ooh, man, look at that. So Cito Cerosyn, April, massive dome up to 20,000 ISK, and now we're just seeing more and more pressure. Not a big move here, 66,000 to 56,000, so quite inexpensive, very cheap, and on a very slow and steady downtrend in the last half year or so. Then we get Amber Miko, that's actually up quite a bit more expensive. So the Miko was always the winner of the April patch, and that one is still 50,000 ISK, 59 for the sellers, 46 for the buyers. So that's still your go-to, of course. Very expensive at the moment on the Amber Miko. Azure Cito actually making its way back up here in the last month or so, back to 10,000 ISK. Volumes are absolutely abysmal, but at least it's a breakaway. And then Azure Miko is not that expensive, but it's still 20,000 for the sellers, 16,000 for the buyers. Big volumes here all of a sudden. Celadon Cito, very cheap, well, relatively cheap. That's still reasonable actually, 70k to 59k, but on the chart it's very inexpensive. And then the Miko, 50,000 ISK. All of these honestly seem to have found their prices quite well and are coming together quite often in similar ranges. Here again, Golden Cito, it's more expensive than everything else. At the moment it's pretty doable at 90,000, 92 to 71, so big margin between sellers and buyers. And then the Golden Miko is actually quite expensive, but heading towards 50k, which is in line with the others, 47 to 40,000 here for Golden Miko Cerosyn. Then the Lime version, 130,000. All right, our first Cito that's actually very expensive, I would say, 120 to 106. So way more demand than supply there. If you find this, I think you're very happy. And then the Lime Miko is again the 50,000 ISK, which is what seems to be the average price range for all of the Mikos. Malachite Cito Cerosyn, 60,000 ISK, definitely a reasonable price on the full chart, nothing too special. And then Malachite Miko, 50k, which is what we would expect at this point. Vermilion Cito is 50k, pretty cheap on the chart, but definitely reasonable again in my opinion. And Vermilion Miko, let's see where this one is at. Actually our first exception, maybe a bit of a reverse situation here. Only 26,000 for the sellers, 23,000 for the buyers. A bit of a premium still from a year ago, of course, but not too expensive. And then the Viridian Cito is 75,000. So among the decently expensive ones on the chart again, if I try to show this, not too expensive, but still doing all right. And then Viridian Miko, 62,000, decently expensive. So the general trends, I would say, for the booster gas clouds is that we are in reasonable price ranges. Most Mikos are converging on 50,000 ISK. Some are a little bit more expensive, some are a little bit cheaper, but in general I would say we're at the high part of the chart, so they have that, you know, that edge, that margin that has to be paid since the April patch. That's become structural. It's just there. And then for the Citos, it's a little bit more of a mixed picture, but on average, I would say they're below average prices, but they're still quite reasonable. Again, it's not like they've cratered to 1-year low points or have become completely useless and valueless. So I would say for gas, a little bit of pressure in the fullerenes in general, but the booster gas clouds are pretty stable in average prices and are basically an activity that has found its range. That's my read on it. Now we'll see in the upcoming weeks and months, of course, if the new Dawn patch will have an impact on all of this. But in general, again, I hate to say it, but the net impact on everything seems to be very, very limited. You've got some niche moves that have been confirmed, right? You've got Noxium going back up a little bit, that seems to be confirmed. Zydrine able to defend the 1000 plus pretty easily, but other than that, what's moving? Yeah, not that much. You get a Mackinac that's become the solo mining ship, and that one's gone up in price, and that's pretty much it. And then you've got people rushing, of course, for some of the new items that now need to be made in order to get an Orca back on the field and things like that. But in general, New Dawn, which is kind of unfortunate, I would say, from the perspective if you're a player that is looking for new stuff, that is looking for that new goal, that new thing to do in EVE Online, the new type of content, that's still not here with New Dawn. We're still basically trying to get the EVE Online economy in the spot that CCP wants, which at the moment I would say is with a lot of levers that they can potentially control. Is that a good or a bad thing? Only the future will tell, of course. I do still look forward to, of course, any news that CCP wants to give on what they're doing and planning for EVE Online. But again, my expectations not that high, because if they want to do a fan fest, I do think that'll be their focus for potentially some bigger announcements. So I think New Dawn, more maintenance rather than a lot of new stuff. And I think it's only going to be after fan fest that we'll start to hear about like the dynamic resource system and things like that. But all right, we will see, of course. I'll, as always, try to keep you guys up to date as well as I can. For now, thank you very much for watching and listening, and as always, I'll see you next time.